Hello everyone. On behalf of Friends of Palestine, Student Socialist Worker Society and the BME Network, thank you for coming to listen to a very important topic and to also participate in a discussion to discuss how anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Just to talk a little bit about myself, if you haven't noticed with my accent already, I'm Palestinian and I come from a very small village in the West Bank called Turqa. My name is Hanan, and upon coming to the United Kingdom, I was asked to be careful when discussing the conflict, for the fear of being somehow unsympathetic to other groups of people. But talking about the settlement expansions around my village, surrounding my family from each and every direction, limiting their movements, talking about political prisoners who were held with no charges in Israeli prisons, settler attacks on our property and occupation as a whole was somehow some sort of an anti-Semitic dialogue. It was as if I needed to choose between speaking up for my people and standing against the anti-Semitic attacks happening around the world and acknowledging the horrors of the Holocaust. However, it was clear to me that siding with a struggle does not mean in any way denying another, and that siding with a Palestinian does not mean standing against the Jewish people or vice versa. Today, we are very honored to have Ilan Pappé joining us, an Israeli Jewish historian and an author of several books, including The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestinians, who's going to talk about this important topic of how standing against Zionism is not in any way a form of anti-Semitism.
From the Bristol Socialist Worker Student Society, and I'll echo again that we're so honoured to be co-hosting this event with Friends of Palestine, the BME Network, and with Ilan Pappé, so thanks for having us. I just wanted to interject and say that we understand how much of a sensitive topic this is, and people are very have a lot to say about it, with a lot of emotions about it, but we're just hoping that everyone can be civil and polite whilst Ilan is speaking and also during the questions. And if you don't do so, we will have to let you leave. So I'm just giving you a pre-warning about that. I'm sure that nothing bad will happen, but just to let you know, we won't accept any kind of acts of that stuff. So just a preface on how it's going to work. Ilan's going to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, and we're going to do it in rows of 3 questions, and then Ilan will come back on those, and hopefully we'll be done by around 8. So yeah, that's that. Thank you.
I don't like to be in the center, but life has its own limitations. Can you all hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Great. Great to be here. It's nice to leave the old white homogeneous Exeter, diverse, vibrant Bristol. Should do it more often. I'm sure fox hunting is not the most popular activity next to the university, so I really feel blessed. I already had my reward. The main problem when you talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is that you need time to explain the term, the equation, to challenge it. And usually when you appear in the media, you're only allowed to express, to make some sound bites or very short remarks about this topic. And I think one of the problems with the recent kind of media debate on anti-Semitism around the Labour Party was that in none of the mainstream media, whether it was the printed media or the electronic media, was there any serious discussion on the issue. It was all sound bites. People were either accused of it or people said we are not. And it was very difficult, I think, for someone who wanted seriously to understand what the issue is all about to follow the debate, apart from understanding that this is a very serious accusation weaponized by those who don't want to hear a pro-Palestinian position. So we have time, and we will try to use this time. This is the university, and we will try to be a bit academic as well as activist in engaging with these two issues. And before you challenge the equation that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same, maybe it's good to remind people what anti-Semitism is and what Zionism is. And through this discussion about Zionism, also define the various positions of anti-Zionism throughout the ages until we reach our times. Anti-Semitism, as you probably many of you know, was born in the Catholic Church in the early competition with Judaism after the fall of the Roman Empire. And it was built around the accusation of the killing of Christ, and then it developed into animosity towards people who refused to convert to Christianity, and also insisted in maintaining a way of life which was quite different from the rest of society. And theologically, it was built as a mainstream position in the Christian faith. Later on, much later on, in modern times, especially in the mid-19th century, with the rise of nationalism, and particularly romantic nationalism, places such as France, Italy, Germany, anti-Semitism became also a secular position, not just a Christian religious position. Because romantic nationalism believes that a nation consists of people of the same race, of the same blood, unlike liberal nationalism, that believes that nationalism is something you can join and leave as you wish. Romantic nationalism, which led eventually to Nazism, and unfortunately we see many of its reappearances in the European continent, and especially the United States these days. So the Jews as a convenient target to explain what the purity of the new nation means. It means that you are not Jewish, because there were not many other people around. And the same racism that the European powers would display later on towards colonized people, they first displayed against the Jews in Europe. And I think recently there are traces of both kind of anti-Semitism, the more classical one that is still associated with the church, or a Catholic point of view, especially in places such as Poland, and to some extent in the Slavic world. And there's still, because of the rise of romantic nationalism, again, this time, although it targets mainly Muslims and immigrants, it also has it reserves a certain place also for anti-Semitism or anti-Jewishness. Now, this position that defines the Jews as heretics and led in the past to horrible pogroms and eventually to the genocide of millions of Jews in Europe, this position has nothing to do with anti-Zionism. It has to do with racism. It's not the only racism, and I never believed that we should have a league, a premier league of racists to find out whose racism is worse. I don't think we need a hierarchy. Any racism is abhorrent, unacceptable, and should be challenged. It doesn't matter on what basis it is. And it would be very wrong to single out one particular racist position because it actually encourages more racism towards that particular group that demands uniqueness as a racist as a target of racism. Zionism is connected to anti-Semitism in many ways, but not in a way that it has been displayed in recent years, especially in the last year and a half in Britain. Zionism, not many people know it, but Zionism began actually as a Christian project and not as a Jewish project. Since the 16th century, but particularly the beginning of the 19th century, especially evangelical churches, Protestant churches in particular, were fascinated with the idea of the return of the Jews to the Holy Land, as they would have put it, namely to Palestine. They believed that the return of the Jews to Palestine would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, and the end of time. And they were active on both sides of the Atlantic, and they were quite powerful on both sides of the Atlantic. Namely, some of them became ministers in the government, people who formulated and influenced public opinion. And there was a connection between their anti-Semitic views or anti-Jewish views and their support for this idea of the return of the Jews as part of a divine scheme which they wanted to see unfolding. Because in a way, if you believe that the Jews should return to Palestine, it means you don't want them in your neighborhood. You don't want them in your country. And actually, if you look even more in a more focused way in their divine scheme, the idea was that after the resurrection of the dead, the Jews will convert to Christianity or will be barbecued in hell. And so you get kind of, especially if you accept that maybe Jesus Christ was a Jew, it's debatable, but let's say that he was a Jew, then these people were really happy of getting rid of all the Jews in their own vicinity and getting in return the only Jew they wanted, which is Jesus Christ. So it's a double bill for evangelical Christians, and nothing will make him or her happier through the week with this notion. And this idea that you can use the Jews as a tool in the unfolding of a divine scheme is both anti-Semitic and Zionist, if you see my meaning, because you both get rid of the Jews, but you also support the idea that the Jews would come back to Palestine. Now, when Zionism became a Jewish political project as a response to anti-Semitism in especially in Central and Eastern Europe in the late 19th century, and it was also influenced by the appearance of modern nationalists, especially around Jewish communities. Many of you probably remember the term the Spring of Nations of 1848, when a lot of religious groups, cultural groups, ethnic groups redefined themselves in national terms and demanded, in the name of nationalism, independence, especially against vis-a-vis the big empires of the world. So the Jews were also influenced, Jewish activists were also influenced by this idea that you can redefine Judaism, which is actually a religion, you can redefine it as nationals, in fact, as a secular nationals. Now, the two groups, if you want, the political Zionists among the Jews and the Christian Zionists, in a way met together in the beginning of the 20th century. And there's no one better to kind of epitomize this new connection than Lord Balfour, who made the famous declaration on the 2nd of November 1917, promising the Zionist movement that Britain do all it can to build a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. Lord Balfour in 1905 and 1906 was behind an anti-Jewish legislation in the House of Commons because he saw that Jews were running away from Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe and were coming in great numbers into Britain. And he disliked the idea and he legislated against their arrival. It's not surprising that the same person was also very enthusiastic about the idea that instead of the Jews coming to London, they would go to Jerusalem. He understood that he had Christian Zionist allies in Britain, especially Lloyd George, Prime Minister in 1917. On top of it, he built a whole very shaky strategic argument that it's much better to have a Jewish colony in Palestine than a Muslim or Arab one for the sake of the interests of the British Empire in 1917. This, of course, was not valid, but it helped to convince the British government to go along with Lord Balfour's ideas. Zionism as a Jewish project becomes more important after the Balfour Declaration. Because here you have an empire, for various reasons I just noted, is willing to materialize, to help implement the idea of the return of the Jews to Palestine. An idea of return that is also very important to the Jews who believe in Zionism, is very important to Christians who believe in Zionism. And this is translated into the construction of a Jewish state with the help of the British baronets, first of all, and with the help of the British Empire. And one should say, with a lot of dynamism and enthusiasm of the Jewish settlers themselves, between 1917 to 1948, the years of British rule in Palestine. Nowadays, we have a better kind of framing to understand what this phenomenon meant, namely the idea of Europeans, whether they're Jews or not Jews, it doesn't matter. Europeans who leave Europe are assisted by an empire, colonize someone else's homeland, believe that that homeland actually belongs to them, indigenize themselves, if you want, and treat the indigenous people as aliens that have to be removed for the new project to succeed. Nowadays, in the scholarly world, we call such projects settler colonialism. We differentiate between classical colonialism and settler colonialism. Because settler colonialism is the movement of people who were themselves persecuted in Europe, were in a way chased out of Europe. They wanted to recreate a new Europe somewhere else with a one-way ticket. They knew they could not come back. They needed an empire to help them to build a foothold in the new country. Their main challenge was the fact that someone else already lived in those countries that they contacted, that they wanted to settle in. And as the late great scholar of settler colonialism, Patrick Wolf, says, at the moment that the settlers encountered the indigenous native population, the logic of the elimination of the native was activated. In the case of North America, the elimination of the native meant really the elimination of the native, genocide. Also in Australia, to a certain degree in New Zealand. In Palestine, in Algeria, in South Africa, it took a different form. It was not a total physical elimination. In Palestine, it took the form of ethnic cleansing. That is, the massive expulsion, as far as possible, of the indigenous people, a kind of replacement, or displacement and replacement process, as the late Edward Said used to call it, which I think was a very good way of describing it. So, who were the first anti-Zionists? First of all, they were Jews who were not enthusiastic about the idea of colonizing Palestine. They were made of two groups, actually. One is still with us. Well, both of us are still with us. One objected to the colonization of Palestine or the settling of Jews in Palestine for religious reasons. You probably are familiar with the ultra-Orthodox Jews who believe that the Zionists tempered with the will of God. You cannot build a Jewish homeland in Palestine unless God wants you to do that. And if you build it prematurely, you're tempering with His will. And until today, ultra-Orthodox Jews, many Orthodox Jews, define themselves as anti-Zionists and do not believe that a sovereign Jewish state tallies with Judaism. Another group was more secular in its approach to Zionism. You had socialists and communists who believed that a socialist or communist revolution was the best answer, would ensure the survival of the Jews. Many of them went to the United States and created Jewish life that had nothing to do with Zionism or the idea of colonizing the Jews. Interestingly enough, also some of the Jews who came to Palestine became themselves a bit of anti-Zionists, trying for many years to kind of, but they were really a small number, but they were sort of hoping that although they stay within the settler colonial project of Zionism, they can offer something different both to the settlers and to the indigenous people. They have different names, Brit Shalom, Communist Party, and they're still around there, especially now when you have a third generation of Jewish settlers. It's not surprising that this idea that you can be in Israel as an anti-Zionist Jew makes more sense than it did in the first wave of immigration. Because if you were an anti-Zionist in 1917 or 1920, you could go back to where you came from. But if your grandfather was already born in Israel, where would you go back to? I know that one of the previous presidents of Iran had some ideas about it happening in Egypt, but it was not very realistic. So you're nowhere to go to, but you can still believe that you want to live within a society whose hegemonic ideology is not Zionism. And the first significant, probably, anti-Zionists were the Palestinians. From the moment they felt that they understood correctly the nature of the settler colonial project of Zionism, which is sort of a few years into the establishment of the first Jewish colonies in the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The moment they understand that this is not just a project of pilgrimage, that these are not just missionaries as they were used to seeing them, but these are people who believe that they, the Palestinians, are the aliens, and that they, the settlers, the aliens, believe that they are the indigenous people. The Palestinian movement opposed the colonization of Palestine. So you can say that they were anti-Zionists. Does it mean that they were anti-Semitic? No. No, they opposed the Zionist movement not because it was a Jewish movement, not because of who these people were, but because of what these people did. And that's a very important distinction. Whenever you talk about anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, or any racism, any objection to someone because of his or her identity, color, nationality, race, whatever, is racist. If I rebuke someone for what he or she does, then it's my right to oppose it, and it doesn't mean that I'm generalizing about the whole group of people. I think we lost a little bit this distinction in recent years, especially in this country when we talked about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Now, in the 1970s, the Palestinian resistance was quite popular around the world, unlike today. And it was built on as a response to the most important act, if you want, of the elimination of the native that I mentioned before, of the Zionist movements against the Palestinians. What the Palestinians called the Nakba in 1948, a catastrophe. When the Jewish forces, the Zionist forces, what I say, Israeli forces, within 9 months, demolished 500 Palestinian villages, half of all of Palestine's villages, depopulated almost all the Palestinian towns, and expelled half of Palestine's population. There's no other definition in our book of war crimes or crimes against humanity for such an act, other than ethnic cleansing, which is a crime against humanity. And the Palestinian movement, first of all, reacted to this crime before anything else. And its manifesto its activity. Maybe some of its activities were questionable, were not the right ones. Palestinians themselves had criticism later on of some of the actions that they have taken. But one should understand the origin of this. It's a response to an act of destruction that, by the way, did not end in 1948. Continued in a more incremental way inside Israel, and after 67, imprisonment of people without trial, and continued ethnic cleansing, and a legal system that differentiates between Jews and non-Jews on the basis of religion, nationality, and race. How can this position be defined as anti-Semitism is really beyond me. I mean, but it is in so many parts of the world, even among people who look quite sober and normal. They somehow adopt this ridiculous position. One can understand it maybe until the late 60s, early 70s, people were not very knowledgeable what was going on. But today, when we know so much of what goes on, it is really, you must be totally blind and mesmerized by propaganda not to see that these are legitimate moral positions. Coming back to the world in the 1970s, when we, maybe in Bristol you understand it, that the world is not just the West. Because in many parts of Britain, it's not easy to say. People think that the West is the world. So the West is not the whole world. It's news to some of you, I don't know. In the 1970s, the rest of the world, which is not the West, went to the United Nations and said, you know, viewing the Zionist ideology as lying behind the Israeli actions in 48 and ever since 48, we would like to define Zionism as racism. Because at that year they also defined the apartheid system in South Africa as racism. And not surprisingly, most of the world voted for it. It took a really huge American pressure on non-Western countries, and after almost 20 years, 1991, that is 21 years later, the United Nations was willing to kind of remove that resolution from its register. But this was after huge American pressure and intimidation and threats to the countries who voted in 1975 and defined Zionism as racism. Was this an anti-Semitic position of the people of Ghana, of Algeria, of Malaysia, of Chile, after Chile joined them after Pinochet? Was this an anti-Semitic position when conscientious groups in the West supported this kind of perception of the Palestinians? No, nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It had to do with probably the last, apart from South Africa still in those days, it was the last open wound from the colonialist period. There was South Africa and Palestine. The rest of the world had a lot of problems, that is true. But at least the colonial empire were dismantled, and colonized people became independent. Even in the Middle East, Iraqis became Iraq, the Syrians became independent in Syria, the Lebanese became independent in Lebanon, the Palestinians did not become independent in Palestine. And for many people, this solidarity with the Palestinian liberation movement meant exactly that. You need to complete this historical chapter in human history. If you decolonize the Arab world, which means you allow the people of the Arab world to define their own future, to express their right of self-determination, however they choose to do it, then you need to support this idea and ask yourself, why cannot the Palestinians express their right of self-determination? The last development in this area which really complicated, I think, the debate a bit, was the emergence or the appearance of the two-state solution. That created some, I should say, that created really some confusion. So I don't blame people for that. It confused a lot of people, even on the ground itself, but definitely observers of it. The two-state solution means the partition of Palestine, historical Palestine, to a movement of settlers, most of them who arrived 3 years earlier. Doesn't make any sense. The people of Britain give half of Britain to a movement of settlers or immigrants who came 3 years earlier, gave them sovereignty of half of Britain. It doesn't really withstand any logic. And yet it was presented as a peace plan in 1947. And when the Palestinians rejected that, they were portrayed as warmongers, people who reject generous solutions such as losing half of their homeland to European settlers. It really shows how ingratitude they are. Then there is something didactic in the way the world was treating the Palestinians. And some of the blame is also to be cast on the Palestinian leadership later on in this thing that happens. The idea is the following. If you don't accept my generous offer for half of Palestine, you will only get a quarter of Palestine. And if you don't accept a quarter of Palestine, I will give you 1/10 of Palestine. And if you reject the 1/10 of Palestine, I will call you an anti-Semitic person. And that is more or less the trajectory that really developed, while, of course, the facts on the ground were that in 1967, Israel occupied the rest of Palestine, which it didn't occupy in 1947-48. Partition was no more the idea of having or partitioning Palestine into two halves. Partition meant, first, allowing the Palestinians to have independence, or sort of an independence, in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Then there was the idea that the Palestinians were rejecting this solution. As I said, the didactic idea was, okay, in that case, we suggest only part of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as a Palestinian state. This came in the 80s and the 90s, and the Oslo Accord in 1993 was the final kind of articulation of this idea. Now, in the meantime, Israel, according to its own ideas of settler colonialism, continued to colonize every part of Palestine, or Judeanize every part of Palestine it could, whether it was inside Israel, in the Galilee and the Nakab, or in the West Bank, or even in the Gaza Strip for a while. And then, of course, came the idea that not only we cannot offer as much of Palestine as we offered you before, now we cannot offer you as much of Palestine as before because there are Jewish settlers there. That once they're there, you cannot remove them apart from the Gaza Strip, which is a different story altogether. And Palestinian resistance took various forms, still takes various forms today, from an armed struggle to popular non-violent struggle. This is still a struggle between the settlers movement and a native population. It is still a liberation struggle. And so typical to settler colonial realities, the settlers become natives. There's no doubt about it. The settlers become natives if they succeed in staying, as the Jews did, 70 years. And it's very clear that you need to find a solution by which you decolonize the whole space that is called historical Palestine, and find a formula by which, let's say, a third generation of settlers and the native indigenous population live together. I mean, that's very clear, and I think it's clear to a lot of Palestinians. The two-state solution did not allow us to frame the conflict in such a way Because at the basis of this American-Israeli idea of a two-state solution is a historical fabrication that actually the conflict in Palestine is between two national movements that began when both arrived at this moment, at the same moment for some reason in Palestine, and began fighting for domination. And luckily, the more mature Americans and Europeans suggested a reasonable solution, which is to partition the land in a very fair way, especially after 67, 15% aid that it's still alive and kicking. And it is not. But it really, I think that this is one of the reasons that in this country, in this I will begin to conclude, that in this country, the accusation of any pro-Palestinian position as an anti-Semitic one appeared. I know a lot of people, among them myself, thought that the timing had a lot to do with Jeremy Corbyn coming to a position of power. For the first time, we have a very significant politician with non-pro-Palestinian position, with the potential of becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. This terrifies the pro-Israeli lobby. This creates a potential for politics from above that can be pro-Palestinian, which never happened in Europe or in the West. Yes, this has something to do with it, but I think much more, now I understand it, with the passage of time, I think there's something much more fundamental than just Jeremy Corbyn here. And this is the fact that if there is no, and you can hear it from a lot of observers what I'm saying, I'm not inventing the wheel and I'm not saying something, it's not a bombshell, a lot of people have already talked about it. It's very clear in the deal of the century, is the last articulation of this, that there is no hope anymore for a two-state solution. So if there is no hope for a two-state solution, you have 12 million people living between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. 6 million of them have all the privileges, and 6 million don't have any of the privileges and the rights. Even if you are a first-year student in political science, in your second meeting in the classroom, and I will ask you how you define such a political regime, you will say apartheid. Or I would say you should do biology. There's no other way of describing it. And I'm not the only one who says it. I mean, Israelis are saying it. So, finally, there's only two options. Either we develop an apartheid state, and let me see how you will accuse people who are against the apartheid state of Israel as anti-Semitic. Yes, it worked for a while, but it won't hold water for long. Really, I'm not impressed by the power of this campaign. I know it worked here for a while, but I think this is really a campaign, a short-lived campaign. Because the apartheid nature of the state has become very, very clear. And who would really, I mean, where would it hold water to accuse anti-apartheid people in the 21st century of being anti-Semites? It won't work. I mean, they'll do everything they can for it to work. I'm not saying, but I'm saying this would be more and more difficult for the accusers than for those who are holding a strong moral position against apartheid in what today is Israel and the occupied territory. Of course, there's another option. The other option is to have one person, one vote, to have a democratic state, to rebuild joint life and rectify the evils of the past. A very torturous journey it will be. It won't be easy, it would be messy. I don't tell anyone it would be nice, but it's much better than what we have today. And I think it's even better for the Jews of Israel, although they still don't see it. But we should start working towards a post-apartheid Israel. And it's still ridiculous, and with this I will end, that according to new directions and directives that I've seen, this very sentence which I said, we should work towards post-apartheid Israel, under new definitions by the government is an anti-Semitic state. But I'm a Jew, which means that I'm a self-hating Jew. It's a disease. And maybe it's the deteriorating levels of the NHS because they went to the and the NHS doctor told me that there's no cure. I said, yes, but since you're half privatized, I'm not surprised. You cannot find such an easy illness a solution. So we will have to struggle, and especially in academia, and to say to people three things. When we define Zionism as settler colonialism or Israel as a settler colonial state, this is not an ideological position. This is an academic, factual statement. Secondly, that if you accuse, but I think one should insist on that kind of attention before willing to enter a discussion. This is my advice to you. Don't enter the discussion unless you know that you have time, because you will not be able to get out of it well. Sound bites, I'm not an anti-Semitic. Yes, you are. It doesn't work well. It's not a ping pong. It's a marathon. You need to run along with it. So I think I'll stop here, and we're very happy to take your questions.
I just want to ask if you thought that Jews had any ancestral links to Palestine before.
Okay.
Yeah, Red and then the Greg.
I read your book about the Palestinian minority in Israel, and I think it came out in 2011. I was just wondering, looking at how the joint list intervened in the recent election, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the Palestinian minority in Israel and their role, and it's changed significantly in the last 8 years.
And a little bit about the history of as you're a historian, 1947, I believe it was unanimous in the Security Council, including the Russian, to support the creation of the State of Israel. I'm just interested to know how that happened.
Okay, very good. Pretty good. Let's start with them. I think, first of all, I don't know if people have ancestors who are 2,000 years old. I don't know if the Greeks who live together today in Greece are the ancestors of the Greeks who lived there 2,000 years, or the Italians are the ancestors, their real ancestors are the Romans who lived there. I mean, humanity went, I know this is an historian, went through so many occupations and colonizations and changes that it's very difficult. However, I respect anyone who believes that they found their ancestors 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. I'm not one of those who write books in order to invalidate this idea that my ancestors are the people who lived in Palestine during the biblical time. It doesn't bother me that much. I don't know if they were. But I respect the fact that people believe that. The question is, what do they do with this narrative? So it's not so much the validity of the narrative. If in the name of the narrative I dispossess someone, something is wrong with the narrative. If in the name of the narrative I want to build a tent near the house that I believe that I lived there 2,000 years ago, fine. What can I do to you? But, imagine if you come in Bristol and you knock on someone's door and you say, excuse me, sir, I used to live in your house 2,000 years ago. And therefore half of your house belongs to you. And you think this person is a bit insane, and you say, that's okay, sir, don't worry. But the next day he comes with the police. And the police says, he has proof that he lived here 2,000 years ago. You have to give him 2 rooms at least. This is where the problem is. It's not an attachment to religious. Muslims have religious attachment to the Holy Land. Christians have. Jews have. Thank God, only 3 religions. Maybe attachment to Palestine as well. I mean, what the Luna part would we have? But the question is not questioning this region, but what you do in the name. The joint list, they are really in a pickle, the Palestinians in Israel. If anything, they learned, I think, in the last 2 election campaigns, and now for the 3rd election campaign, that they are in a very uncomfortable situation. On the one hand, after 70 years, they succeeded in uniting in one parliamentary list. On the other hand, it was not for the first time, but their presence in the parliament is totally insignificant. It has no bearing whatsoever on the reality. This was made very clear by the two big parties in Israel. So it's not surprising among the young Palestinians in Israel, there's a big debate whether to boycott the next election or not. I myself think that you don't boycott and you don't destroy something before you build something else. I don't think there is something else. We have only this kind of representation. It's a good sign, and I don't think it will have an impact on their status inside Israel. I'm afraid this has much to do with the way Israel is building itself as an apartheid state, or gradually building itself as an apartheid state. But I think it might influence, I hope, might influence other Palestinian groups. Because without Palestinian unity, it would be very difficult to push forward an alternative for the reality on the ground. It was the General Assembly, not the Security Council, the General Assembly that voted in two-thirds majority for the creation of a Jewish state, and you're right, the Soviet Union and the United States in 1975, they have a different perspective on Palestine. So that's one thing to take into account. Secondly, I think both the Americans and other Europeans were looking for a quick solution, if you want, to the Holocaust. They wanted to remove the Holocaust from their agenda. And they hoped that the support for a Jewish state in Palestine would absolve them for dealing with the horrors of the Holocaust in Europe. They wanted, especially in the West, they wanted a new Germany, to recognize a new Germany as quickly as possible, and so on. So I think that also played a role. The Soviet Union, why didn't it support Israel? Well, I think they wrongly believe that Israel is going to be a socialist country with a pro-Soviet orientation. Well, these are the years of Stalin. It's not the only thing he got wrong. So I'm not surprised. But that's what they thought. They really, I think that was, as you know, they even supplied weapons to the Jewish forces with which they cleansed Palestine.
Any other questions? But also included many Jewish people, and this idea of the wrong kinds of Jews that have came into being, but it's still the wrong kind of Jew is still vilified and puts alongside this anti-Semitism, and it's becoming institutionalised with universities and local authorities being sort of forced to adopt the Holocaust Alliance, OHO, definitions of what anti-Semitism is, and also and then local authorities and universities are being, and our government even, and they're sort of weaponising anti-Semitism to make these things like BDS actually criminally illegal. What have you, I'm interested in your view on that, and what is going on, that we've got that in another country here. What is going on? And in the States, I think, it mirrors very much what's happening in the States. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So people might have heard in recent news that there's a state called Kashmir, which is north of India, recently lost its right to self-determination, taken away by the Indian government. And there's kind of a sentiment that if you oppose that, then you're anti-Hindu. I was wondering what, if anything, we can learn from like the history of Palestine and how we should go forward dealing with this.
I'm quite interested as to why you can't take a Zionist approach to the solution or to the situation while still being critical of the Israeli government. Because if you're supporting Zionism, i.e. you're supporting the Jews' right to a homeland like every other religion, you can still remain critical of the Israeli government's treatment to Palestinians. I don't understand why that wouldn't be an approach you would take.
So let me take the 3 points. I think you're right. Anti-Semitism, in this particular case that you're talking about, the Labour Party, was weaponized very successfully, I should say. I don't think the only problem was for people who was Corbyn's own pro-Palestinian position. I think also his socialist positions were a problem for a lot of Blairites and neoliberal forces in the country. And I think once they realized that it's working, they joined the wagon. Suddenly Peter Mendelssohn became an expert on anti-Semitism, where until then he wasn't not an expert on anything. He appeared every 5 minutes. Every television station had him explaining how this party has an institution of racism. Not 2 years before, but just in the last 2 years. I'm writing a book about this. It's called Lobbying for Zionism in Britain. And I'm looking at it. The roots are much deeper than just the last 2 years. It's a campaign of silencing and stifling that began in 2005. Because Britain is important for Israel and is important for Palestine. It carries responsibility for what happened. It doesn't recognize that responsibility. And therefore it's an important arena for everyone involved. And Israel has a special kind of ministry of strategy that targets particularly the UK and the US for trying to prevent any significant shift in public opinion in 2 countries that the support for Israel was taken in their eyes for granted. But it's not taken for granted anymore. Suddenly they realize it through the cyberspace that something is going on, that you can't read just the mainstream media, you have to read the internet, and then you see that there are undercurrents of young people that in the names of moral values side with the Palestinians. What do? You can't send F-16 to bomb them. I mean, you can, but it won't work. So this is weaponized. This is something, and I think we need to learn this, to understand it, and expose it, because it is interference in British politics. It's a violation, I think, of the unwritten constitution that Britain has, and the written constitution that the United States has. And therefore, I think, as I said to this, it's very difficult to see in the West support for Muslim liberation movements. It's kind of, it doesn't work in the reservoir of images of Western churches, the position of power to see a Muslim as a liberation fighter. Even if, like Che Guevara, that appears Muslim. It somehow does not fit their understanding, and I think that really is very difficult to and the only thing I could say is not so much what you can learn from Palestine, is to ask why don't we have even stronger connection with Palestine and Kashmir. And not just Kashmir and Palestine. Settler colonialism, although it was very destructive in Australia, in North America, in Central America, in South America, there are still movements of indigenous people asking for their rights and struggling for their rights. And I think we should extend the network of solidarity. I was very moved when in the Gaza Strip, after the events in Ferguson, there was a demonstration in the sieged Gaza Strip. There was a demonstration in support of the African Americans in Ferguson. That's the kind of thing we need to see. Because there are connections between the oppression of African Americans in Ferguson and the oppression of the Palestinians. The same weapons are used. The Israelis train the police in Ferguson. The Israelis are training the Indian who are using weapons in Kashmir. I think that these exposure, both of the networks of oppression and strengthening the networks of identification, not so much of identity, identification, solidarity should work much better than it does. it's not I wish it was criticism of the Israeli government when I criticize Zionism. I don't criticize the Israeli government. I criticize the very notion that Afula in Israel is a city that does not allow non-Jews to live in it. And every Israeli agrees with it. I cannot accept the idea that some of the land in Israel can only be sold to Jews. This is Zionism. I cannot accept the fact that a Jew who is born tomorrow in Brooklyn has more rights to citizenship than my friend Mahmoud's brother, who has been in a refugee camp in Lebanon for 70 years. This is so I wish it were policies. No, I'm struggling against the very core ideology of the state in which I live. And although I fully understand, I'm an Israeli Jew myself, the wish for, first of all, security, secondly, for self-determination, collective rights, I don't think that they are so sacred that they can be bought or attained through a series of crimes against humanity. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And therefore, I work very hard in Israel itself with my friends, Israeli, my friends, my family, everyone, my former students, so on. I really believe, I genuinely believe, that Zionism is not only bad for the Palestinians in Israel, I think it is bad for the Jews. I think a de-Zionized Israel is much better for everyone. The warden in the prison is also in the prison, not just the prisoner. And I think it creates a lot of issues that would be resolved if we would gradually build a more egalitarian, equal society. And therefore, it's not a matter of a policy of that or either government. It's a matter of an ideology that informs your educational system, your media, your structural treatment of Palestinians throughout the last 70 years. And you have to begin to challenge it. You have to begin to challenge it. You know, I was so proud of my children who decided not to serve in the Israeli army. I was really proud. Because I didn't indoctrinate them, but it was very clear to them that if you serve today in the Israeli army, you will chase old women in the Kasbah of Halim. You will shoot at demonstrators near the Gaza fence. I mean, you will be part of an oppressive police. In South Africa in 2014, every white person I met said to me, I was against apartheid. I believe something like that would happen in Zionism. But I'm an optimistic person.
I put my grandfather and millions of others in concentration camps during the Holocaust, and I think it's worth noting that this anti-Semitism is alive and kicking today, from Charlottesville to Pittsburgh to Halle, so not too far away from where I live in Hampstead in North London, with swastikas being scrawled on the streets. And I think the attempt to try and conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism actually only seeks to belittle the real threat from fascism and the real anti-Semitism that we're experiencing today. And I think it does this on two fronts. I think firstly, it belittles and undermines the threat that we face from the far right, because actually those who make the attacks on the left in Britain, and I think we should be clear that it is an attack on the left. That's why I'm so happy to see so many people here today, because this is not just an issue for Palestinians, Muslims or Jews, this is an issue for everybody who likes to see themselves as fighting against injustice in society. But it's those who make the attacks against the left in Britain and the UK, who are also those who pander to the anti-Semitism of the right, from Rees-Mogg and his attacks on George Soros, to Viktor Orban, who's, Netanyahu's many a time called Orban his friend. And this man is a seething anti-Semite. If people don't mind, I'd just like to read a quote from a speech that Viktor Orban made just 3 days ago. Viktor Orban said, "We are fighting an enemy that is different from us. Not open, but hiding. Not straightforward, but crafty. Not national, but international. It does not believe in working, but speculates with money. It does not have its homeland, but feels it owns the world. So this is language that could be taken straight out of the 1930s. The anti-Semitism in Viktor Orban's speech is clear, and I think it's really frightening, and actually this terrifies me as a Jewish student in Britain. And those people like Boris Johnson, Rees-Mogg, Donald Trump, who refuse to condemn such language, with their silence, I think only seek to actually condone the racist views that they hold. And I think secondly, and even more importantly, what's so dangerous about the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, one of which, i.e. anti-Semitism being a disgusting form of racism, and anti-Zionism actually being, I think, as Ilan has pointed out, a perfectly acceptable political position which Jews and others have taken for a long time. The attempt to conflate these two positions weakens our unity that we need in the face of fascism, actually, because like we say, it puts us against the good Jews and the bad Jews. And we need solidarity because, I'm sorry, but when the Nazis come knocking at our door, they will not distinguish between anti-Zionists and Zionist Jews. They won't do it, okay? So I think and it's why I'm an anti-fascist, and it's why I argue that we should stand in solidarity against all forms of racism, starting with the racism that the Palestinians have suffered for the last 75 years.
About education. Actually, there are some good books written by some critical Israeli scholars, such as Louis Hanan. She examined deeply the representation of the Palestinians in Israeli textbooks. And the picture is very gloomy, I must say. It's a very racist representation of the Palestinians. And it, of course, does not include any recognition or acknowledgement of who they are, where they came from, what they went through. But even more worrying, there is a kind of dehumanization that is typical to settler colonial projects. You cannot, I just see the last picture, it's one of the million pictures that you can see. The Israelis have a prison for children, Palestinian children, and they move them sometimes from prison to prison. Usually they move them at night. For some reason, a month ago, they moved them at daylight. So activists were able to take pictures of this. Only a dehumanization of people can lead people to do such a thing, and they have to be brought up in such a way to dehumanize the people in such a way. Now I know myself because I'm a product of the Israeli education system, not I'm a flawed product, thank God. But I'm a product of that system. I know the beast from within, and it's very difficult to understand because so many Israelis, unique, nice people, are very open-minded. They can be. First of all, I think that equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is ridiculous. And the best thing to deal with it is to ridicule it, rather than take it seriously. That doesn't mean that classical notions or modern notions of anti-Semitism should be ridiculed, of course not. I don't think they are more prevalent in the Labour Party than in the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson wrote a story a few years ago where his main character is, compared to Shylock, his main character looks even worse than Shylock in Shakespeare. Anti-Semitism is ripe, particularly in the Conservative Party, and as a rule in right-wing politics. So yes, anti-Semitism itself should not be ridiculed. Actions against Jews because they are Jews should not be ridiculed. But if anybody who opposes severe criticism of an apartheid state that oppresses daily and other people and try to stop this criticism by accusation of anti-Semitism should be ridiculed, should not be taken seriously. And I think we should never retreat from that moral position. I also would I think even in Israel, your version of events of 1948 is not accepted anymore. I don't know where you got it. I hope not from the University of Bristol. If you did, I'd have a serious conversation with the Department of History here. The Arabs of Palestine were not called to leave the land. This is fabrication. This is nonsense. The Arab armies were not intending on genociding the Jews in Palestine. There's a far more complex reality there, and I suggest to you to look at the work of the new historians of Israel to see that even Israelis know now that 1948 was an operation which meant there was an historical opportunity to take as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. And it was partly successful. In fact, the incompletion of the ethnic cleansing of 48 imposed many of the Israeli policies after. So I think we should separate the two issues. What Israel has been doing to the Palestinians and is doing to the Palestinians is because they are Palestinians, not because the Palestinians are doing something, but because the Palestinians are the main obstacle for the idea, ironically, for the idea of a democratic Jewish state. Because if the Palestinians will not be a minority, how can you have a Jewish democratic state? You can only have a democratic state. This is a problem. And if you are a liberal Jew, if you are an open-minded Jew in Britain, if you're an Anglo-Jew with a reasonable moral position towards life, you cannot support the idea that in order to sustain the Israeli demography, or democracy, you're allowed to downsize the Palestinian population in every means possible. Even 72 years after the Holocaust, this is unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. That doesn't mean that you'll have an easy life. No, you won't. The Palestinians did not immigrate to Israel. Did not immigrated to Israel. Israel immigrated into Palestine. So if you want to immigrate into someone else's homeland, you will have to live with the people of that homeland. And that means that if you build an apartheid system of privileges, it will be the main reason for a continued conflict. And if you want to end that conflict, yes, as painful as it is, you will have to give up some of your privileges. You will have to redistribute lands. You will have to share the land with the people you have kicked out. And maybe change your immigration law. Not everyone you want will be able to come back. And hopefully build a democracy, as some people in the world already enjoy. Why shouldn't Jews and Palestinians enjoy it as well? And maybe if it succeeds there, it can influence the whole region that needs urgently democratization and respect for human rights and civil rights. But we will not have a proper conversation of abuses of human rights and civil rights in the Arab world if it will not include a serious conversation of the abuse of human rights and civil rights in Israel, by Israel. Thank you.